Hey everybody, I'm Bill Calkins with Ball Tech On Demand, and we're back with another installment of In the Break Room, an entire month of short educational sessions intended to help you get prepared to grow your best crops ever to send to market next year. Fall is a critical period in every greenhouse, the time to get your operation tuned up for high-end production. We've selected 9 topics to cover this month, one for each Tuesday and Thursday. Hopefully you're taking some time each day to grab your phone or your tablet, grab your computer and a bite to eat, and find a quiet spot to hear from industry experts. Today's topic is one of my favorites and one that's relevant to everyone in our industry. Our guest expert has trained hundreds of growers on this topic. It's Dr. Will Healy, the Senior Technical Manager at Ball, and he loves to talk watering. In fact, in the past, we've done podcasts, we've done videos, we've done a lot of training on watering together, and they all have a lot more detail than we're going to get into in 30 minutes today, but I will put those links in the show description. So how's it going today, Will?
Oh, not too bad, although it sounds like I only can talk about water, but of course I can talk about a little bit of everything for a really long time. So you're really going to keep me right down to the last possible second and then just cut me off so everyone can get back to work. But October is one of the funnest times from a program presenter because this is when we're really gearing up and getting organized. Summer's over, everyone's back to school, we're back to work, and now we're focusing on let's get those poinsettias done and let's move into spring when the real excitement starts coming at us. So at that point, Bill, should we just go ahead and get going and get right into training your team?
Yeah, and I just wanted to remind the viewers here that all these webinars and videos are going to be archived and collected at growertalks.com/tech-on-demand for your future viewing pleasure or to share with the rest of your team. And again, I'll put that link into the video description. So it's enough of me. Will, why don't you go ahead and get started because break time is short and this information is critical.
Yeah, and training your team to water is probably one of those topics that people think, well, that's kind of boring. But every year you basically need to go back and remind everyone, how are we going to be watering? What's the appropriate way? What are we trying to do? Just kind of get everyone on the same page, or as we say, get everyone on the same rails, because the biggest problem we run into is that, the season starts, everyone's kind of getting back into it. And if you don't get everyone back on the same rails at the same time, they wander away, and then we end up with all kinds of problems we spend weeks and months trying to solve. So let's just quickly just kind of hit on the top line topics that they really need to be thinking about. When you talk about training, the whole training issue is really a problem of how are you approaching your growers and telling them what to do. One of the biggest problems that we have today is that growers with nothing to do water. We basically tell them you need to water. What we're doing is we're paying them to water. In our mindsets, we're saying, okay, by God, you're going to water and we're going to pay you to water. But if you really think about what is a grower's job or what should the job be defined as, the job is really to dry out plants, get that soil to dry down so that they can water again. Because as we go through this process, we need to be thinking, what should we be paying the people for what they're doing? I think you would find that your overall growth, your root development, your disease control, your insect issues, basically a lot of problems that you have when growing plants would suddenly be solved or at least mitigated if you changed the paradigm from pay to water to pay when you dry out and hit the dry target. I think if you could basically pay your growers every time they hit the dry target, I bet you they would change their approach and your overall product would be improved. Now, what we're going to talk about is ways that you can actually monitor and manage this as a manager, and then help create a teachable moment where you can help them learn why they should do what they do or don't do correctly. And what we're talking about is doing pencil watering. Pencil watering really is about planning ahead. Planning what should you be doing tomorrow to improve the overall growth in time. Too many times growers have what we all know is an OS moment where they walk in and the plants are dry and they then just start pouring water on like firemen. that's not really the strategy, because really, if you sit down and think about what we're trying to do, we're trying to grow roots. Our job is to grow a strong root system so we can put fertilizer on to be taken up so that the plant will grow, so it can take up water and can grow. So really it's about getting them to dry out so we can put on water so that they can have roots that will grow. Because one of the truths in this industry that we can't forget is that fish grow in water and roots grow in air. As you can see, there's a tremendous amount of roots in here, and they basically will grow better where there's a lot of air, because they really do need that air to get the fine root systems, the root hairs. Those of you who look carefully can very nicely see that fuzzy root. That fuzzy root has more surface, more nutrient uptake, better water uptake, and basically a much healthier root. If you're growing them in water, you just don't get the root growth that you need. So let's just remind everyone about what is the water knowledge pyramid. This is anyone that has listened to anything knows that you don't have to know every step on the pyramid, because it's progressively more knowledge that you will learn. But the very first one that you need is you need to get a language of watering. And this is the water levels 1 through 5. We have a very good presentation on that, and you can check one of the links and it'll go into how you define 1 to 5 and how you basically create them and train people on that. That is a qualitative. What we really want to have people think about is the quantitative, and that's a change in weight, a measurable, repeatable, actionable data that you can take and use to train your growers to improve and have them help make sure that they're being and consistent in their performance. Then you have to make the decision and train people when to water. How dry? What is the dry target? Get your dry targets established. Normally it's a level 2, but if you're doing quantitative where you're doing it by weight, that basically you can say when it hits this weight, when it hits 900 grams, when it hits 600 grams, when it hits 700 grams, it is time to water. And then you can then put on how much to water. Okay, if you watered it down to 900 grams, you're going to add 600 grams, and we want to see about 1,500 grams in this whole block. So that will help direct your water people to not put on too much water, which will take too much time to dry back down, and so that you lose that wet-dry cycle becomes too slow, which is overwatering. Okay, then you have to ask the question where to water, especially when you're first getting started after transplant. How are you watering to draw those roots down? Remember, roots search for water. If there's water sitting at the top of the pot, they're not going to go to the bottom. Fact of life. If it's dry on the top and wet on the bottom, where are the roots going to go? They're going to go to where the water is. So we really need to be thinking about, do we have lazy roots? Do we have a bunch of teenage roots that are just laying around waiting for the food to come by? Or are we basically causing them to be active roots, digging through the soil, looking for roots, water, looking for nutrients? Finally, we've got plant demand, which is bigger plants need more water. So we need to make sure that we look at the plant demand. And finally, how does the climate? We're going to talk a little bit about that. But those are the different water pyramid levels. And as people learn more and understand more, they get higher and higher in the water pyramid. So you're watering people, and everyone needs to know the language. Your people are actively carrying around hoses, need to know how dry and how much water, and everyone else needs to be moving along. What are we trying to do in this slide? When we take a look at this, these are the 5 levels of watering, 1 through 5, and you can see progressively drier. Remember, as you lose water, the soil does breathe, because as the water goes in, it pushes the air out. When the water comes out, the air goes in. Good example here of saturated soil where there is no air, and as you dry it down to a level 1 where there's no water, you can see there's more and more air pockets. We have a lot of tools in our trade that basically lay out a different amount of water. When you're thinking about your tools, are you using the right tool to give you the amount of water? Because these are all rated in gallons per minute. So the slower you walk, the longer the timer is, the more gallons of water that are being put out there. Take a look at your different breakers that are there and see how many gallons per minute are you putting out, because that will help you understand how much water should you be doing based on the time that it takes to lay out that water. Remember, when you're training your people, watering technique is very important, because volume times speed equals how much water you're applying per pot or per cell. So the faster you walk, the less water that's getting put onto that. The slower you walk, the more water. So you really need to ask yourself, how much water are we putting on, and where is that water going? Look at where is your water tunnel, and where is, because that's where it all starts. Because if you start out with a consistent amount of water in those pots, in those flats, at the time that they are heading to the greenhouse, it's much easier to predict and manage it. If you have variable flow, you have variable activity, you're going to have variable performance out in the greenhouse, and it's more work to get it even. So what you want to do is make sure that you've got your watering nozzle set up so that you're uniformly applying your moisture, and then also have targeted weights that you need to have at the time that you transplant, at the time that you sow, at the time you stick cuttings. So you know that those trays going out into the greenhouse have the target weights that you want. Because you ask yourself, well, what difference does it make, Will? That just seems like a lot of work that's not worth it. Well, here's a good example of alyssum. On the first day, when they first go through that water tunnel, this is what 100 grams difference makes. 100 grams is the difference between uniform germination and erratic and very poor germination. And crop after crop, we see this, where the amount of water that you're applying, are you within that right target moisture, you will see improved performance. And that's really the objective, is improved performance. Well, but Will, come on. We like to go and just soak them in really good. And then I have to ask you the question, so do you got algae? Are you one of those people that like green slime on the top of every pot? Because there's nothing like a good green slime to bring those fungus gnat shortfly larvae in, and they basically love to eat, I think they're called fungus gnats. And so therefore, if it's got algae there, you got fungus. So there, it's a perfect environment to basically breed a problem. So, and of course, once you get that there, and you're stuck. How do you get rid of it? You really can't, unless you put more chemicals on and more problems. You know, it's really about how are you watering in that day 0 through 5, those first couple watering, because the problem that you've got is that the soil is hydrophobic, meaning that it repels water, it floats. Let's take a look at it and let's see, are you in those first 5 days creating a slimy surface? Are you basically getting it? And the question is, how do you do it? Well, it's fairly easy. If we take a look at the cross of a pot, when you pour water on, if you see that column on the left, you got some dry soil on the top and some kind of wet soil, and then you've got water underneath, because what happens is the soil is basically hydrophobic. It floats. I think you've all probably seen it when you overwatered a plant, then all of a sudden the soil comes up to the edge of the pot and then goes back down. And this all happens on the first couple waterings. Well, what's happening underneath that pile of soil is, see all that little, those floaters in that column on the right? And the column on the right, those are all fine particles. Well, all of those fine particles that float out and settle to the bottom first create this crust. This crust is what's killing you, because the crust has a different water flow through it. And so it has slow water flow. Well, slow water flow, how many of you been to a swamp? Swamps have kind of a muck on them because there's very slow water flow. So it gets this crust, which then encourages the algae to grow, and all of a sudden. So when you have a situation when you've got a lot of crust and you've got a lot of algae, it's because you're not irrigating correctly. You're basically putting on too much at one time. You're getting the peat to float. You should, when you've got really dry peat out there, you need to basically take a fine and go water really fast so there's no floaters, and then come back and water it again and water it again and water it again until you get to your target water weight, because that will get you to prevent floating and getting the crust. Let's talk about water by weight as a management technique that allows you as a manager to basically create teachable moments. A teachable moment is when you can actually change the behavior of your staff. And what you want to do is looking at water by weight, because it is a very good way that you can actually record what happens on Monday, that the following Friday you go, these plants don't look good. And the grower stands and says, well, I did everything I was supposed to. And you have no record of what happened Monday through Thursday. Is all you have is what you see on Friday. You know in your heart, they're too wet, they're too dry, they're not right, but you have no record. So when you do water by weight, It basically improves your consistency and reproducibility, because it basically gives you a metric, something you can measure, something you can train to help the growers do it more consistently, reproducibly. What you're going to see if you start going water by weight and you hit your targets correctly, you'll see less stretch, less insect and disease problems, overall better overall plant quality, because they're paying attention. It's very, very directive. What you want to be doing is you want to be recording the weight before, when you say, it's time to water, record the weight so we know where did you make the decision to water? What was that weight? Then when you're done watering, come in and water, measure the same pots or similar pots in that area. And then you can basically say, I added so many grams of water. I added 100 grams, 120 grams. Just basically buy cheap kitchen scales for 15, 20 bucks. And it's the cheapest thing, most productive, most profitable piece of equipment in the entire greenhouse. Basically, and then the next thing you want to do is you want to plot it, because it allows you to pay attention to the detail, so that you can then see when you walk by that the targets, as you can see in this graph, that wet target is the top line, the dry target is the bottom line, and this poor soul never hit anything. This is a trainable moment where we can come in and we can tell them, guys, when we say dry target, we're not saying somewhere nearby. We're saying water when it gets to that bottom line. And make sure you put on enough water to get it to the top line. And then basically, if you start recording it, you can see what the morning weight is and the afternoon weight. So you weigh it when they first come in. This is pencil watering in its essence. When you come in the greenhouse in the morning, you walk around and measure, 4 or 5 plants in that greenhouse block, and that gives you a sense of where you are, especially if they're all the same. Then you measure them again that afternoon after break and then you can kind of see where you are. And then by basically doing some simple math, which is scary for most people, looking at the day versus the night, you can start seeing how much water do we lose overnight, how much water do we lose during the day. Because also when you're thinking about training them to water, think about where to water. What is that three-dimensional space we're dealing with? We're dealing with the depth, the middle, and the edge. So if you basically make sure the water goes so it's dry at the top and a level 3 at the bottom, you end up with highly branched pots. When you have a wet at the top and dry at the bottom, you end up with basically horizontal and root wrapping, as you can see. When it's saturated top to bottom, your root system is very poor. When you have a 3 to 5, you can end up with a very uniform roots all the way through. So for your success in watering, you want to make sure that you're watering to draw those roots to the bottom of the container, saturate to a 4, which is a drip, and basically dry it out to a level 2. And then you train your growers to basically water it 4 to 2, and look at the bottoms of the pots. Are the bottoms dry? Have they reached a level 2? Have they reached a level 4? We want to make sure that we're drying that cell out. When you water, the reason why we don't take it to a level 5 is because if you go to a level 5, you end up with what is called sigmoidal drying of that tray, which means that when it's saturated, it takes longer to start drying out because you've got that water at the bottom of the cell. From a level 4 down to a level 2, it's very linear water loss. And so you have linear water loss all the way down to a level 1, where it's basically slows down again, as it's hard to give up that water. So what we want to do is we want to look at what is our water loss between taking it up to a 4 and dropping it down to a 2. Because if we have a water loss of, say, 200 to 300 grams per day, which of course your pencil watering will tell you, then you can basically determine that if you have you need to lose 800 grams, because that's how much water you put on, and you lose 200 grams per day. Guess what? You basically are going to take 4 days to lose that water. If you take it up to 400 grams, you're going to dry out in 2 days. So it's a very mathematical, simple back of the handle and calculation. So we want to basically always keep our moisture between level 2 and a level 4. One of the questions people always ask is, how do you dry a tray out? Because, if you're going to pay me only if the tray dries out or the pot dries out, how do I do that? Well, it basically goes down to evaporative transpiration. Evaporation from the soil and transpiration from the leaves. And, what we have to look at is, what does the plant see and what do we see? The picture on the right, basically, A is what we see. We see nothing. But if you were to go and have the magical glasses, Bill, that we've got that basically show what relative humidity looks like, If you look at under the canopy, you would see this kind of foggy look as well. Fog is high relative humidity after all. So B is really what you're seeing is you're seeing fog underneath there. And if you have high relative humidity underneath that canopy, you're not losing water. So what you want to do is you want to have wind. Anyone that has seen a foggy night day in here, as soon as you get a light wind, it blows the fog out. That's why we want good airflow within the greenhouse so that we can then break that boundary layer and get the air moving over that crop so that we can then get it to lose water from the soil evaporation or from the foliage transpiration. Because what you're looking for always is the change in weight. And at this time of the year, the nights are longer than the days. So really the day water loss, not really interested in. What we're really focusing on is how much water are you losing overnight? Because your night water loss is going to drive the majority of the water loss during the course of a 24-hour period. So what's your water loss at night? Are you water losing over 50 grams? You're in trouble. It's going to take forever to dry those plants out, and you're going to see a lot of problems. If you got 50 to 100 grams, basically it's slow drying, very slow drying. As you start going to 200 plus grams overnight, that's very fast drying, and you better have your act together because you will dry plants out if you start going 300, 400 grams overnight. So really be looking at what is your overnights, and these are all tray water loss. But even pots will start losing this kind of waters too. So really kind of look at how much water am I losing overnight? You know, as a manager, that should be the first question you should ask your employees. The guys that are watering, the women that are watering, folks, how much water did you lose last night? Is that good or is that bad? Was it planned? Was it not? You know, what did you do and how much water did you lose? Because you need to put front of mind water loss. Pay to lose water. That's the name of the game. So let's just kind of just recap here and see when you're training your growers, these are the questions that you need to be asking them continuously to get it in the front of their mind of what they're doing. How much water did you lose each day? How much did you lose at night? How much water did you add in this situation? And you can look at the graphs to reach your target weight. You know, how much water do you need to add today so that or should you add water today so that they're at the right target weight tomorrow morning? Because we all know going through the night, watering late in the day and going through the night is a sure prescription for overwatering, for disease problems, for soft plants, for disease problems, I think, Bill, the issue is disease problems. So making sure that you've got that you're watering first thing in the morning, not late at night, and that you then basically thinking forward when you come around, how much water should you be adding so that you're at the right target tomorrow morning? Because you know that in this greenhouse at this time of the year, you're losing X amount of water because you've measured it. You know it, you're knowledgeable, and you will find much better performance. How much water do you have to add to get to the bottom of the pot, to get that drip? Keep that in mind. They need to know that. And then one of the biggest questions, it's not, to keep them on remembering, it's not how wet or dry, but how long it takes to get to the next dry target that is critical. You know, if you're growing gerbera and you got the crinkle, okay, the reason you've got the crinkle is you're spending 48 hours or longer till you go from dry cycle to dry cycle. We know conclusively if you are on a 36-hour, a 72-hour dry cycle to dry cycle, meaning it takes that long to come back down to your target dry weight, you will crinkle that plant. Pretty much guaranteed, take it to the bank. So we need, and there's a lot of crops that have this problem. So really be focusing on how long did it take? You know, are you drying it out within 2 days? Awesome. Are you taking 3 days? You taking 4 days? That's a problem. Ask the question, know it. So to recap, the water knowledge pyramid, language of water. Got to have that so that you know what is the qualitative and quantitative. What's your number and what's your weight? Wind to water. Set your dry target. What's your dry target that you want that crop to be at? Set your wet target, because then you know how much to water. Make sure that everyone's watering that much. Make sure that you're watering to drive the roots down, so that you're basically always have the wet spot below the roots, so that it's pulling it down till you get to the roots to the bottom of the pot. Look at how much the water do you need at each stage. We're going through poinsettias. When those poinsettias start going reproductive, they are basically doing nothing. They're not going to take up water. They're not going to take up nutrients. So, make sure that you're not overwatering, because if you overwater and keep them saturated for 72 days, what are you going to do? Grow pythium. So you basically need to make sure that you've got the right amount of water in there for that stage. What's the climate? As we start closing down these greenhouses, it's going to start staying higher and higher relative humidity. So make sure that you're moving air to get the vapor pressure deficit. So that's pretty much the whole water in a nutshell, things to think about. I hope that that's been helpful. So what do you think, Bill?
I think that's great. We actually have an extra minute. I have a question. My question is, if you look at the course of a year and the stages of crops, is there a point or a time when you see the most watering issues come up? Is it in the middle of winter? Is it with a propagation or with finished plants? Where do you see the biggest issues coming up with watering?
Week 50 to 5. Week 50 to 5. The day lengths in this northern hemisphere are shorter. We've got a lot of overcast. Sometimes it snows, and it's dark, it's dreary, and the greenhouses aren't very full, and people have nothing to do. So instead of cleaning the greenhouse and doing sanitation, which I think we're going to talk about later, what they're doing is they're basically out there watering, because they really don't want to do the sanitation. So they're watering, and then they're not getting the 48-hour dry cycle. And then of course now you're off on the wrong foot, so you've got plants that are uneven, you've got plants that aren't doing well, and so the whole problem just starts rolling downhill, not well. So this is where you need to get in here now in October, as we're finishing up the poinsettia season. Get those targets set, get people trained, get them on the rails. We got to be on the rails. We can't be wandering the fields. You got to be on the rails and get your targets set, understand how your watering technique is creating the targets and hitting the targets that you've set as a management. Management sets the targets, growers implement the target. And creatively you work together to decide what is the target. There's not a perfect target, it's your target. So you need to figure that out, and always try to stress towards how dry can we go before we're in trouble. Because if you have a dead plant, that's bad. The problem is overwatering seldom, if ever, dies, because we got chemistry to fix that.
No, I think that's true. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So if people have more questions, by all means, there's a number of great resources that we've prepared out there, and Bill will attach those for you to follow up on.
Absolutely. And just to give a quick shout out to the Greenhouse Tech team on Facebook. It's a closed Facebook group that anyone in the industry is more than welcome to join. Just search Greenhouse Tech Team on Facebook in the groups section, and answer a couple of simple questions to prove you're in horticulture, and we will welcome you to the group. And you can certainly post any watering questions there, and Will or many other experts will jump in and offer comments and thoughts. And it could be growers giving you some information about what's specifically happening in your own area. So Will, thank you so much for spending some time in the break room covering this topic. Like I said at the beginning, it's critical to everyone in a greenhouse, and I think it's critical to all teams, including the management team who's going to set these targets. And having that whole team on the same page is really important. And you gave a lot of the reasons why, and some true measurable ways to know exactly what you're looking at when you walk into the greenhouse on that Friday afternoon. So we'll really, really appreciate it. Before we close, again, a reminder, all these videos from the Tech on Demand in the Break Room series are collected and posted at growertalks.com/tech-on-demand. And like Will mentioned and I mentioned, links to more watering resources in the video description. I definitely recommend the Language of Watering podcast. It is a deep dive into watering with Will, and it's really one that you should be sharing throughout your team. They can throw their earbuds in and listen to it while they're watering. So that's it for today. And on behalf of Will, I'm Bill Calkins with Ball Tech on Demand, wishing you success managing your watering and water loss next season. Thanks a lot, Will.